Edcon, the company which owns Edgar's, Jet, Boardman's and also CNA, is in trouble. It's been in trouble for quite some time. In fact, it's been through almost as many chief executives as SAA has in the last couple of years. It certainly has had almost as many chief executives as South Africa's had finance ministers in the last 3 years. The most recent appointment as chief executive is Grant Pattison. You might remember him from his Massmart days. Why is Edcon in so much trouble, Grant Pattison?
It was a mistake to delist it in 2007 and put in 20 billion rand of gearing. That's the fundamental core error that went wrong. There was some unluckiness after then. We had the global financial crisis thereafter, and every subsequent decision that has been made to try and rescue it has ultimately been made because of the decision to over-leverage it.
And lots of companies made that mistake. Edcon has survived, but only just.
But only just, yes, only just. And to the credit of its various funders, it doesn't make enough cash to sustain itself. And so it, from time to time, has to go back to its banks and its shareholders and ask for money. And up to date, they've always come up with the money.
It got to a point last year, though, where everybody seemed to have run out of patience. Certainly Bain, who were a big shareholder, they'd run out of runway on this. And it was then up to South African banks to step into the breach.
Yeah, it was still a consortium of banks. I think the thing that in the end was the banks wanted Bain to exit, i.e. they wanted, if we're going to give you more money, you must give up control, and giving up control means getting out. So no, it's still funded probably in the majority by foreign banks, and mostly distressed debt hedge funds.
How complicated is that a relationship to manage as the chief executive of an entity like Edcon, which is sitting with this, when the debt is now considerably reduced, it's been converted to equity, but these guys are going to want their money back over time?
Correct. It's very difficult in one dimension because they're the sort of shareholders who don't fall in love with you. They are financial shareholders. They, as you say, invest in business plans. So in that respect, they're very difficult. In another respect, they're very easy because they're professionals, they're experts at this, they organize themselves very well, they're agents appointed, they're consultants appointment. So in that respect, it's not too time consuming, but they wouldn't mind me saying that they're not good shareholders. That type that love you and help you strategically, they are financial shareholders.
So, it's a fairly lonely job then, as chief executive of an entity where you've got people who are simply interested in you turning a profit as quickly as possible so they get an asset of value to flog at some point in the future.
I think any chief executive's job is lonely, not because you haven't got lots of people talking to you, but because in the end, without a controlling shareholder, in the absence of a controlling shareholder, the chief executive ultimately makes the call up until the point he or she gets fired. So in that respect, it's a bit lonely.
What gives you a better chance than your predecessors of making Edcon work?
I would say if I've got any chance of making it work, it perhaps is that I know the local environment a bit better than they did. Remember, there was an American, a German, and an Australian. I think they were all cognizant that they were not local, so they used a lot of consultants. I don't like using consultants, and I think they can make things worse, which they did, I think. But maybe that's it. Maybe I know enough about the South African environment, in particular some of our inherent problems that we've got of overspace, over leverage of the consumer, and I can maybe distinguish between an economic consumer problem versus a financial problem.
Sales of both Edgar's and Jet, the two biggest profit contributors to the group, are falling, down by more than 6% each year on year. Customers, talk about people falling in love, your customers have fallen out of love with you. How do you get them to fall back in love?
Yeah, that's very, very difficult. So two things are causing that. One, and it's probably the bigger problem, is that credit is no longer in favor. Customers are deleveraging. Also, our credit offering has become uncompetitive. So we don't stand out as, hey, if I'm going to have a store credit account to buy clothes, this is the one I've got to have. We've lost that competitiveness, somewhat because we have sold the book, and so it's no longer in our control. We've taken some control back. But that's the first real cause. So I think the first fix there is to redo that relationship and make sure we become competitive in the credit environment. The second one is, of course, the product. People ultimately just wear our products in some part of their body. And we made some mistakes. We thought that the response to international competition arriving was to bring in international brands, and that was wrong. The response was to strengthen the local brands. So we've strengthened the local brands. If you go back into our stores today, you'll see a very strong clothing offering in local brands.
I mean, can you really compete, though, in a market as competitive as South Africa has become? When Mr. Price, of course, became big 20 years ago, it was the challenger brand. Edcon, Edgar's was dominant. Jet was very strong in its markets. Since then, we've seen massive expansion in the Foschini Group, in True West, multiple brand strategies coming through. Cotton On, for example, coming in, H&M coming in from Europe. You've got all of these new rivals in an economy which is increasingly strangled.
Yes, and you know, I think those companies have grown like they've grown, and the new arrivals have come because Edcon was weak. I think these two things are connected. People have grown off the dying carcass, if you could call it, for some time, eaten off the dying carcass for some time. It's still the biggest, though. So in clothing, it's the biggest. In beauty, it's in the biggest. In stationery, it happens to be the biggest, and it's the biggest credit business in South Africa.
But for how much longer? Because you can't sustain the size of this monster. You're looking to close down, if these numbers are correct, considerable amount of real estate. I mean, 3 times as much land as occupies Sandton City is what you're looking to close. A third of all of your floor space, either closed or downsized. That's significant.
It is significant, and if you look at the financials, if you study the financials, a significant step is required. You know, I think the funders were starting to lose hope or lose support for I'm going to trigger with the marketing, credit offering, clothing turnaround strategy. I don't think that was going to happen. There was a reality. Edcon's trading density is half of what it needs to be. Edcon's stock turn, very important number in retail, is half of what it needs to be.
So in other words, if you've got 100 T-shirts and you're only selling 50, that you need to be selling 100.
You need to be selling the 100,
in order to ensure that you get the best bang for your buck.
So the only way to make our way back to the right trading density and the right stock turn is to do it in 2 bits. One is become a better retailer, and the other one is to shed some space. I adjust for our new market size. Once you're carrying that burden of increasing lease costs, and you're carrying the stock to fill the stores, you're on hiding to nothing.
And that's where, essentially, Edcon has gone wrong and persisted in going wrong for as long as it has.
Edcon's gone wrong, I think, like all big businesses go wrong. They've got a core business, Jet, Edgar's, CNA, and then they're going to do other things. Red Square, Boardman's, Jetmart, and 30 international brands. You know, so if I had to take you through the business, if I had to walk you through Sandton City and point you all the things that were ours, you would go, wow, I didn't know that. So like all turnarounds, like all big businesses, at some point you have to go back to what your core business is. And our core businesses, so we're not talking about shutting space in these brands, Edgar's, CNA, and Jet. Everything else is under review and will be shrunk, but the big businesses, the ones that the customers really know, those will still be there and in fact grow.
I'm talking to Grant Pattison. He is the chief executive of Edcon. It is the holding company for a range of South African household brands. There will be fewer of those brands into the future. What will disappear from South African shopping mall? The likes of Red Square, the likes of Boardman's, for example. A long troubled idea that Tom Boardman, former chief executive of Nedbank, brought to South Africa, created in the middle of the 1980s, just before the Rubicon speech. It feels like it's been in trouble ever since then. More on that in just a moment with Grant Pattison, chief executive at Edcon.